Hello guys, in this video we're going to have a look at some of the lights that you can use in your UDK levels. So I've just got a real simple level set up here. I've got a player start point, which I might not need, a static mesh just to show how some of these lights work with the shadows, and of course we've got a light mass importance volume in there, which we discussed briefly in a previous video. So to access our lights, you can see at the moment I've got no lights in the level, right? I'm currently in unlit mode. If I go to lit mode, you can see that there's actually no lights there at all, completely dark. Right, so to access our lights, we're going to go into the content browser. We're going to look at Active Classes tab right at the top here. So we're going to come down to lights, and we've got directional lights, point lights, sky lights, spotlights, and we've got these UT pickup lights as well. Now we're not going to bother looking at the UT pickup lights. They're used for very specific circumstances in Unreal Tournament maps, and we're not going to need skylights either. That's kind of an old light that was around before light mass. So we're not going to need those lights, but we are going to look at directional lights, we're going to look at point lights, and we're going to look at spotlights. So we'll start off with point lights, and we are just going to look at the basic stuff to start off with, right? We can maybe look at the more complicated stuff in another video, or perhaps in class, but not in this video right now. We're not going to look at the dominant type of light, or the movable or toggleable. We're just going to stick to the basic lights for this one, right? So I'm going to grab the point light and click and drag and drop it into the level, and I'll close down my content browser. And I'm going to lift this light up a bit. So you can see we've got shadows already, but these shadows won't look like this when we do our lighting builds. So that's kind of just giving you an idea of where they're going to be. It's going to change when we do our light build. And I'm just going to open up the properties of this light, and I'll close these down so we can look at it as it would be when you open up this window. So we're going to go into light and then light component, and we're going to start off with point light component. Now the first value that we're going to have a look at is radius, and if I just go into my viewports, you can see that around this light we do have a light radius, and the radius is basically how far this light can travel, right? Pretty self-explanatory, that one. As we change this value, you can actually see the radius shrink and expand, and that changes how far this light is actually traveling. So I'm just going to put that back up a little bit, and I'll zoom in so we can see these shadows. Oops, there we go. Alright, cool. So that's radius right there. Then we've got fall off exponent, and this basically what we've got here is, because of the radius that we've got, this kind of controls how the light gradually decays as it gets from the center closer to the edge of that radius. So if I just bring the radius in a little bit, you can see that we've got this kind of soft edge around our light. If I take the fall off exponent down to 0, we get this real harsh edge around our light, which is not particularly realistic, but you might need it. I don't know, you might want to use that at some point. You'll notice as well, it does go to slightly above 0. It kind of takes it down to the minimum value. Whenever you put 0 into these values, it will take it down as low as it can go. So if I set that to 0.1, it gets ever so slightly softer. 0.5, now we're starting to see a bit of a softer edge. Take it to 1, now we're starting, as we go up from 0, we're getting what's called linear decay, and we can set it back to 2 as a default. If ever you do want to set any of these values back to their default, you can see whenever you change something, it goes bold, right? The text goes bold, and that shows you that you've changed the value. If you want to set it back to default, just right click and then click reset to default. Okay, so I've set that back to its normal value of 2, and we're just going to turn that radius up a bit so we can see the shadows being cast on the wall right there. Shadow fall off exponent basically controls the when you're using light shadow modulate, I'll explain a little bit later, that controls the softness of your shadows. Okay, so we can get nice soft shadows or very harsh shadows when we're using light shadow modulate, but again we'll explain that a little bit later. So translation, this kind of just moves the light away from the control widget right here. So if I set the Z value and add 50 to that, you can see that the light source actually goes away from the control radius, the control widget, sorry. You might not need to use that. To be honest, I've never really need to use that, but it is there if ever you need to do that. So that's the point light component settings very briefly. We'll look at the light mass settings now as well. So we've got indirect lighting, which we looked at in a previous video. I'll just go into full perspective mode here, but we'll just show you what happens with that indirect lighting scale. And remember, indirect lighting is how light bounces off the surface of other objects and bounces around the level, and that can only work when you've got a light mass importance volume in place, which is this thing right here. So the indirect lighting scale is set to 1, and we'll do a quick lighting build, and we'll show you what the difference is when you change that value. So I'm going to do a quick build. I'll pause the recording and I'll come back when it's done. Right, our light build is done, and you can see that we haven't got any of these dark areas in the corner of the level anymore, and that's basically because the light is bouncing around the level, because we've got our indirect lighting scale set to 1. We're getting light bouncing around the level. You'll also notice that these shadows down here are not looking particularly good, and I'm going to explain why that is. That's as a result of the light source radius, right? And this is currently set to 32 and will be as a default. And you can look at the light source radius as basically like, if this is a light bulb, the light source radius is the size of the light bulb. So 32 is actually making this light rather large. The source of the light is quite large. Now, if I change that, I'm going to set it down to a value of 0. So we've got a very small light source radius. We're just going to focus on these shadows for this one. So I'll do a quick build, and I'll show you what happens when we do change that light source radius down to something very low. So quick build. And we're done, and you can see now, because we've changed the light source radius to 0, we've got much nicer, sort of crisper, sharper shadows, and that's because our light source radius is much smaller, right? It's like the difference between a massive, huge light bulb and a very, very small light bulb. Alright, we're not going to look at these ones for now. Again, we can have a look at those in class, or you can have a mess around with them yourself, or do some reading on the Unreal documentation. But we're going to just skip straight down to light component now. And light component, the main two that we're going to have a look at for now, we're not going to look at these. We are just going to look at brightness, which changes the brightness of the light, right? It doesn't change the radius. It's still going to be confined to the radius that we've defined, but it does change how bright that light is within the radius that we've set. And we can change the light color as well. So if we click on the little box right there, we open up the color palette, which I can't seem to move right now. Okay, it's going to stay where it is. And we can basically pick a color for our light. We can decide how saturated it's going to be. We can decide how dark it's going to be as well. This is the alpha as well, which really doesn't have much of an effect at the moment, but we can change the color. We can change the saturation of that color and how dark the light is. If we do set that right to black, by the way, it's going to give you a black light, which is effectively turning the light off. So yeah, that's that. If you do press cancel, it's going to go back to the way the light was before you started changing it. So it's gone back to white. To actually apply that change, we do need to press OK. Alright, so just to quickly recap through those, we did the point light component, we looked at the radius, we had a quick look at the fall off exponent, and we explained the shadow fall off exponent. We did the indirect lighting scale and the light source radius, we looked at brightness, and we looked at light color as well. And like I say, we will look at the other settings another time. Alright, so I'm going to close that down. I'm going to delete my point light now, and I'll do a quick lighting build just to get back to where we were. And when we come back, we're going to have a look at spotlights. Alright, light build is done. Now if we go back to lit mode, we got no lights in there anymore, and we're going to go to our actor classes tab, and we're going to get rid of point lights, and we're going to look at spotlights. I'm just going to grab a normal spotlight, drag, drop it into the level, get rid of my content browser, and I'm going to lift this spotlight up into the air so we can have a good look at it. Right, okay, so let's have a look at the properties for this. Just before we start, I should point out that a spotlight's only going to shine light in one direction. We can change the angle of that light cone that we can see right there. So if we press F4 to have a look at its properties, I'll close these down and we'll just have a look at them one by one. So we're going to go to light and then light component. We'll start off in spotlight component. So we've got two cone angles right here. We've got the outer cone and the inner cone. If we change the outer cone angle, it's currently on 44 as a default. I'll change that to 60, for example. There we go, 60. That's going to make the cone a lot wider. The angle's a lot wider now. Again, I can set this up to 90, and it's kind of shining out in all directions except for upwards. And we've got the inner cone angle as well. So to demonstrate that one, I'm just going to set this back to a value of 50. And you can see that we've got this kind of soft edge around it. If I change that inner cone angle and set that to 50 as well, we get a really harsh edge around the outside of our cone. Okay. Again, I can set that a little bit lower to soften it. So I set it to 45. It gets a little bit softer, and you can actually see here we've got like a kind of a hot spot in the middle of the light here. This little bit around here, that's the inner cone right there. You can kind of make it out. Now if I just go into the top view, you can see that a little bit more clearly. This is the outer cone here. and this is the inner cone there. So if I change that inner cone to, let's say, 30, you can see the inner cone angle change. We can set that down to 0, and we get a very soft light around it. Alright, so that's your cone angles right there. Let's go down to point light component. Now radius, I'm going to go into my views again. Radius is kind of like how far it's going to shine, just as much as it was on the point light. So if we change the radius here, you can actually see that cone get longer and shorter. Now if I just take this all the way up to here, you can see that it's not actually reaching the floor anymore, and I can point it right the way back down again, so we're definitely hitting the ground now. Right, okay, so again, fall off exponent. That's going to sort of determine how far this light can actually fall off, you know, the gradual decay, same as it was in the point light, and same for shadow fall off exponent as well. We've got the light mass settings down here and light component settings as well. And again, these are the same as they were on the point light. So we've got all of our indirect lighting and light source radius. We've got the brightness and the light color as well. Very much the same as what we saw on our point light. So I can skip through all of those to save a little bit of time. Alright, okay, so that's our spotlight right there. The main ones that you want to be concentrating on that is your outer cone angle and your inner cone angle, and the rest of those properties are pretty much the same as what you get on your point light. So I'm going to get rid of my spotlight now, and I didn't do any lighting build, so I don't need to worry about setting it back. If I go back to unlit, you can see we've got no lights. So I'm going to open up the content browser. We're going to go to actor classes, and we're going to go into directional lights this time. And we're going to grab a directional light and drag and drop it into the level. So the directional light is basically replicating like your sunlight or your moonlight in your level. This is like an infinitely large light source, which is going to shine light in sort of like a parallel lines, right? So basically that means it doesn't matter where you actually position this light. It has absolutely no bearing. You can actually put it through the floor and it won't change how this light actually works. I tend to keep my my directional light up in the air. It just sort of makes sense to do that, you know, because it's the sunlight. So I kind of tend to look up for that. But it's up to you. You can put them anywhere. The only thing that does matter with your directional light is the rotation of it. You're not going to see any shadows for now. You won't see those till we do a light build, but you can get an idea of where the light's going by just having a quick look at the walls here. So we can see that we've got light shining on this wall, and we've got shadows being cast on these walls. And if you have a close look at this, you can actually see there's an arrow coming out of the light point right there, and that's giving you an indicator of which direction your light is actually traveling in. So I'm just going to set this up, so I'll point it towards my static mesh that I've got set up here, just so we can have a look at some shadows that are going to be cast by it. Alright, that'll do. So we're going to have a quick look at the properties. I'll close these down, and again we'll go into light and then light component. We're going to have a look at light component. No, we're not going to look there first. We're going to look at light mass. So we'll do a quick build with this light, a quick lighting build, just to show you what kind of effect we're going to get, and then we'll change some of these properties around, and you can have a look at the effects of changing these properties. So quick light build. I'll pause the recording. I'll be back in a sec. Alright, there we go. There's our light build done, and you can see that we're getting some indirect lighting. We've got our indirect lighting set to 1, so we're getting light bouncing around the level, and we've got kind of soft shadows here. We've got a little bit of soft shadowing down on these shadows here as well, and they look alright, but we're going to have a quick look and see what happens when we change some of these settings. It looks quite nice at the minute, and sort of with the default settings with your directional light, it does look quite good, but you might want to change some of this stuff. So again, we can set our indirect lighting scale, right? So instead of changing it to 0, I'm just going to change it to 0.2, and we'll do a quick build, and we'll see what the effect of that is. So quick build, I'll pause and I'll come back. Alright, that's done. Close that down. So yeah, now you can see with indirect lighting scale set to 0.2, we've got less light bouncing off of these walls and casting around the rest of the level. So effectively these shadows have become a lot darker. I will set it to 0. I'll show you the effect of that, right? So now our indirect lighting scale is set to 0. Remember, this is all controlled by our light mass importance volume. We are in the light mass settings after all. So I'll do a quick lighting build with indirect lighting set to 0, and you can see what the effect of that is. Alright, light build done. So we've got no indirect lighting now, and basically our shadows are very, very dark. We've got no lighting bouncing around the level, and yeah, it's kind of left us with these very, very harsh, very dark, very deep shadows. Not particularly realistic. So just to go back, I'm going to set this back to 1, and I'll rebuild my lighting, and we're going to have a look at the next value, which is our light source angle. So quick build. Right, so our light build is done now, and our shadows are back to the way they were with our indirect lighting set to 1. Let's have a look at the light source angle now. So notice how we've got these kind of soft edges around our shadows. If we change the light source angle from 1 to 0, and we do a light build, and you'll see what the difference is. So quick look at these shadows, nice and soft around the edge there. And we'll zoom in on these ones so you can have a look at those. And we'll do a quick light build, and you can have a look at the difference. Alright, there we go. So with light source angle set to 0, we've got much sharper edges to our shadows, right? We haven't got the soft sort of gradual fall off of those shadows. And again, the light source angle is really similar to the light source radius on the point lights and the spotlights that we had a look at. So if we open up light component again, you've got the same stuff as before. We've got brightness and light color, which we can change. Alright, so that's pretty much it for lights, and we'll have a look at more of these sort of properties in the class, or we can have a look at them in other video tutorials, but that's kind of like the basics for now. You guys can have a bit mess around with these values and properties and see what you can do with your lighting inside of your levels. Alright, I hope this has been useful for you guys, and I shall see you next time.